The world didn't explode this time. That was the problem. Sokovia stood, damaged, scarred, but standing. Buildings leaned where they shouldn't. Streets were split open like old wounds. But there were survivors walking through the rubble, helping one another climb, lift, carry. There were cameras too, lots of them. Peter noticed them as soon as the adrenaline wore off. Drones hovering at a careful distance. News helicopters circling just far enough away to feel respectful. Satellites tracking heat signatures. Power fluctuations, faces, always faces. He stood on the edge of the evacuation zone. Mask off now, suit torn and blackened in places. His breath still hurt when he took it too deep. Steve approached, shield slung over his back. "You okay?" Steve asked. Peter nodded. "Everyone else?" "Alive," Steve said. "Because of you." Peter didn't accept that. He watched families being guided onto transports. Wanda stood nearby, exhausted but upright. Pietro glued to her side like a promise he refused to break. Vision hovered a short distance away, observing everything with quiet curiosity. Tony landed nearby, helmet retracting. "Well," Tony said, gesturing broadly at the city. "No crater, no floating rubble apocalypse. That's progress." Peter glanced at him. "People still got hurt." Tony didn't argue. "No," he said, "but fewer than last time." That word hung there. Last time. Steve's jaw tightened slightly. Natasha joined them, tablet in hand. "The world's already reacting," she said. "Governments, relief agencies, committees." "Committees," Tony repeated, grimacing. "Fantastic." "They want answers," Natasha continued. "Who authorized this? Who made the calls? Who decides next time?" Peter felt a familiar pressure behind his eyes. "Next time," he echoed quietly. Steve crossed his arms. "We did what we had to." Tony turned to him. "And we almost paid for it." Steve met his gaze evenly. "But we didn't." Peter stepped between them. Not physically, but presently. "That's the wrong argument," Peter said. Both men looked at him. "We're acting like the question is whether we were right," Peter continued. "It's not." Tony frowned. "Then what is it?" Peter looked past them. At the cameras, the rescue crews, the people who had almost become statistics. "It's who gets to decide next time," he said. Silence followed. Not angry, uneasy. Vision drifted closer. "Human fear is an interesting response," he said calmly. "It does not always align with logic, but it does influence outcome." "That's one way to put it," Natasha muttered. Thor approached last, eyes distant. "There are greater forces stirring," he said. "Ultron was not the end." Peter's spider sense stirred faintly, not warning, foreshadowing. Steve finally spoke. "We're stronger together." Tony didn't disagree, but he didn't agree either. Peter watched the space open between them. Subtle, invisible, but real. This wasn't a breakup. It was the beginning of distance. Later, as transports lifted off and Sokovia faded beneath cloud cover, Peter sat alone near the Quinjet's open ramp. MJ's face appeared on his phone screen. Live feed, shaky, worried. "You're alive," she said. "Yeah," Peter replied softly. "I am." She studied him. "You look different." Peter thought about that. "Maybe," he said. "I'm just seeing things clearer." As the jet climbed higher, Peter looked back at the city one last time. They had saved it, but saving something didn't mean owning it, and the world was starting to ask questions that didn't have heroic answers. The Quinjet felt smaller on the way back. Not physically. Nothing had changed in its dimensions, but the silence pressed closer, heavier than the roar of engines. Everyone sat where they'd landed after Sokovia, not moving much, not speaking unless necessary. Peter watched condensation trail along the open ramp, clouds slipping past, like the world was deliberately turning its back on them. Across the cabin, Tony stared at his gauntleted hands, fingers flexing slowly, like he was testing whether they still belonged to him. Steve sat opposite, posture straight, eyes forward, already bracing for something he could feel coming, but refused to name. Natasha broke the silence first. "Phones are lighting up," she said. "Not just media, heads of state, defense councils, people who don't like surprises." Tony let out a short breath. "We saved a city." "Yes," Natasha replied. "But we also almost lost one. And from their perspective, the margin doesn't matter." Steve turned slightly. "They weren't there." "No," Natasha said. "They weren't. That's the point." Peter shifted, feeling the weight of the conversation settle onto his shoulders, even though no one was looking at him yet. Wanda sat near the rear, arms wrapped around herself. Pietro stood in front of her, blocking nothing, guarding everything. Vision spoke softly, as if testing the room's tolerance for philosophy. "Human institutions respond to trauma by seeking control," he said. "It is statistically consistent." Tony looked up. "You're saying this was inevitable." "I am saying," Vision replied, "that fear rarely asks permission." Steve's jaw tightened. Tony leaned back, rubbing his face. "We can't keep pretending this is just about punching robots." Peter finally spoke. "It never was." All eyes turned to him. Peter didn't rush. He chose his words the way he'd learned to choose his swings, carefully, knowing the damage mistakes caused. "Every time something goes wrong," he said, "we tell ourselves it was necessary, that it couldn't have gone any other way." Tony nodded faintly. "Because sometimes it can't. And sometimes," Peter continued, "we say that because it hurts less than admitting we didn't see another option." Steve looked at him now. Really looked. "You think we should have waited?" Steve asked. "No," Peter said. "I think we should stop acting like speed and certainty are the same thing." That landed harder than Peter expected. Tony glanced away first. Steve didn't. "So what?" Steve said, measured. "We stop when people tell us to." Peter shook his head. "No, we listen. There's a difference." Silence returned, this time sharper. Natasha stood. "Whatever's coming," she said. "It won't start as a fight, it'll start as paperwork." Tony snorted. "Figures." The Quinjet began its descent. Avengers Tower felt colder when they returned. Not abandoned, just watched. Staff moved carefully. Conversations hushed. Screens in the background looped footage from Sokovia. Destruction paused on dramatic frames. Headlines already forming their narratives. Peter stood in the elevator with Tony and Steve, the quiet thick enough to be uncomfortable. The doors opened. They stepped out together. And immediately, they didn't. Tony went left, toward the lab, toward analysis, toward solutions that could be measured and contained. Steve went right, toward debriefings, toward people, toward accountability that lived in faces instead of data. Peter stayed where he was. The doors slid shut behind him. He looked left, then right. Neither direction felt wrong. Neither felt entirely right either. Later, alone on a balcony high above the city, Peter removed his mask and let the night air hit his face. New York stretched out beneath him, familiar and unknowable all at once. MJ's voice echoed in his head. Come back to me. He would, but not yet. Because somewhere between Tony's certainty and Steve's faith, Peter felt the ground beginning to shift. And for the first time since he was a teenager, he wasn't sure which way was forward. New York settled into its usual rhythm with unsettling ease. Traffic returned. Lights burned late. Sirens became background noise again instead of prophecy. The city absorbed what had almost happened and moved on. Not because it understood, but because that was what it always did. Peter Parker stood on the fire escape outside his apartment, mask resting beside him, suit folded neatly at his feet, like something he hadn't decided whether to bury or keep. Inside, the lights were warm. MJ laughed softly at something on television, trying not to wake May. That sound, that exact sound, anchored Peter more than gravity ever had. He stayed where he was a moment longer. Above him, helicopters passed at a distance. News, government, watchful eyes that didn't know his name but were already searching for it. Peter exhaled. He slipped inside quietly. MJ looked up immediately. "You're home," she said, not a question. "Yeah," Peter replied. "I am." She studied his face, not for injuries, for distance. "Did you save the world again?" Peter shrugged. "We stopped it from ending." MJ nodded. "That's different." He smiled faintly. "It is." They sat together on the couch, May asleep in the next room, the city humming outside. Peter rested his arm along the back of the couch, MJ leaning into him like she always had. For a while, neither spoke. Then MJ said quietly, "You didn't tell me everything." Peter didn't pretend otherwise. "No," he said, "I didn't." She waited. He chose honesty over comfort. "They're not breaking apart," Peter said. "Not yet. But they're starting to ask different questions." MJ looked at him. "And you?" Peter stared at the dark television screen, his reflection faintly visible. "I'm trying not to answer too fast." Days later, on the highest balcony of Avengers Tower, Peter stood alone again. This time, Steve found him there. No shield, no uniform, just a man who carried too much responsibility too quietly. "You didn't take sides," Steve said. Peter nodded. "I didn't want to." Steve stepped beside him, hands resting on the railing. "That won't last forever." Peter met his gaze. "I know." Steve didn't press. "That's why I trust you," Steve said finally. "You don't confuse certainty with righteousness." Peter looked out at the city. "I've seen what happens when people stop questioning themselves," he said. "Even the good ones." Steve nodded once. "If it comes to it." Peter shook his head gently. "Not yet." Steve accepted that. Later still, Tony appeared in the lab doorway as Peter prepared to leave, briefcase in hand. "You're not staying," Tony said. Peter smiled. "You already knew that." Tony leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You always do this," Tony said. "Hover in the middle." Peter paused. "I stand where I can still hear both sides." Tony studied him, annoyed, thoughtful, maybe a little grateful. "When this blows up," Tony said, "I'm gonna say I warned you." Peter met his eyes. "And I'll say I warned you too." Tony snorted. "Fair." They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Peter left the tower quietly. No fanfare, no announcements. Just a man choosing not to let fear or loyalty decide his future for him. That night, Spider-Man swung once through the city. Not chasing danger, not answering alarms. Just moving. Feeling the web catch. The buildings answer. The world still holding together beneath him. He landed on a rooftop overlooking Queens. Home. Peter removed the mask and let the wind cool his face. The Avengers weren't broken, but they weren't whole anymore either. And somewhere between gods and governments, Peter Parker understood his role more clearly than ever. Not to lead, not to obey, not to control, but to remember why saving the world was supposed to matter in the first place. The camera pulls back, Spider-Man silhouetted against the city skyline. Alone, but not lost. The multiverse just opened a new gateway. Miss the Part Productions is now on Ko-fi, our official hub where you help fund and shape new universes. Pay what you want. Commission custom what-ifs. Support the production fund. Join the creative circle. Support expand the multiverse.